Well, welcome back, everyone. It's just another day in the life as a military wife. And lately, it seems like I've been having a similar conversation with a lot of military spouses. It regards parents' choice, school choice, vouchers, the difference between public, private, and charter schools, pluses and minuses to homeschooling, just basically how do we educate our kids? And because we move around so often as military families, that can be a more complicated question than individuals who stay in the same community the entire time their kids are in school, because we're having to navigate different laws and state codes and all sorts of stuff. So we're going to break that down this week. I am your host, Sam Wolf, and as always, you're listening to Life of a Military Wife. Okay, so first things first, I'm going to try to present information as much as possible. I have my own opinions and perspectives in regards to school's choice and parental rights in education. And I know those are phrases that are being thrown around a lot, and they mean a lot to a lot of different people. But what it comes down to me is my mother was a public school teacher and then a charter school teacher. Basically, she was a teacher for the majority of my childhood. And I definitely have very strong perspectives on education, the value of education, and the importance of tailoring education to meet an individual child and family's needs. The issue with that is not every system is going to work for every kid and every family. And some families are going to have hybrids using multiple different systems because of the special nature of the educational needs for their children. Whether it's their children are significantly advanced and need to be more challenged, or their kids need more assistance, it doesn't matter. Every family, every kid is different and unique. So do not take anything that I say as a what you have to do. I want to empower you to make the choice that's best for your family. And I want to do that by giving you information, giving you resources and just guidance. There's a lot because we move around all the time. We move all the time in the military. And what might work for your family in one location may not work for you at another duty station. And so being flexible is also really important. So, I'm going to, broadly speaking, focus mostly on the United States. I do know the military families are stationed overseas and that things factor in differently based on those situations. Broadly speaking, there are 4 categories for education in the United States: private, public, charter, and home. Those phrases mean drastically different things in different countries. They have different vocabulary. Even English speaking countries label things differently. Public schools in the United States are schools that are funded and administered by the Department of Education. Those can include up to 2 different types. Majority speaking, public schools are the ones that are in the local area. They're administered by the Board of Education, but they're also overseen by a school board, a local school board, which is elected by the local community. And the revenue for those schools comes from taxes, local property taxes. Then you have the public schools on military installations. Those can be public schools in the traditional sense, administered by a local community in a local school district, or those can be Department of Defense educational schools, which are run by basically they're not attached to a local school district. By and large, they're very similar. There are differences and nuances, but I'm not going to focus on them in depth for the point of this conversation. If you've got a question or want information, please let me know. I can break it down in more detail. Charter schools are publicly funded but privately operated. So in this instance, they may have some connection with a local school district, but they are run by a private organization and management sort of thing. Basically, they're privately owned. They're not a public entity. They often will have special requirements or focuses. They can have a more strict enrollment requirements, like a test to get in. They can require things like uniforms. They can allow for more flexibility in curriculum. Just a lot of variation can apply. The reason why they're not considered a private school, which we will address in just a second, is because they do receive money from the Department of Education, basically. Or the local government. Basically, they're publicly funded. The exact funding depends on the place. There's a lot of nuance. But basically, public schools are public. They are run by the government. For a lack of a better nuanced way of putting it, charter schools are privately owned and operated, however, publicly funded. But they don't, to my knowledge, receive as much funding as full public schools. Then there are private schools, which are privately owned and operated and privately funded. The most common ones that I've run into are like the ones run by the Catholic Church. There's a lot of different private schools all over the United States, though, and variation is found drastically amongst them all. They can have religious organizations associated with them and or religious doctrine and requirements for attendance. So that's something to keep in mind. And then the last option is homeschool, which is education provided in the home, sometimes supplemented in a lot of ways by groups, associations, curriculum programs, and whatnot. But it tends to be administered by the parents for the kids, typically in their home. Now, do you have to homeschool in your home? No. A lot of homeschoolers will do homeschool at the park. Or if you're in Hawaii, I would do it at the beach. But anyway, there's flexibility in the exact location, but that's the general breakdown for those three categories. Now, this is the next thing I wanted to get into, and I'm trying to get a lot of information into a small period of time. But here we go. We're going to break it down. So, homeschooling, I found a really great website that it's Homeschool Laws by State. It's run by the it is called the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. This is the first one I want to get into. This one is actually, from what I was seeing on their website, a really great resource. They've got a page, and I'm going to put it on there. It's Homeschooling Laws by State, and it breaks down just each state, what, requirements, whatever. You can click on the state that you're living in. For example, just randomly clicked Arizona. Oppositions for homeschooling, there's one, and you can look it up and see the details. Schools required for kids from age 6 to 16. You do have to notify the state if you're homeschooling. It doesn't have to be a qualified teacher, just basic stuff like that. So I'm not going to go through state by state and read every stat. I'm going to give you the link. Look your state up. Look up that information. But if you're looking for homeschooling, figuring out what's required or whatnot, that's a great way to get started. And I know lots of people homeschool. Maybe they homeschool one kid and their other kids go to a different type of school. Maybe they homeschool one year and not other years. You've got to find what works for you. I know I keep saying that, but it's true. The other one that I wanted to do, it's the 50 state comparison to private school choice. And now this has to do with vouchers or scholarship programs. And there are, I think, what does it say? Okay, yeah. 72 voucher programs in 16 states, including the District of Columbia. And then there are 6 states that have ESAs, or educational savings accounts. So again, I'm going to send you the link to this so you can explore what your local area has and what it does and what are the requirements and whatnot. But basically, the reason why this is important is for individuals who are homeschooling. Some of these ESAs will help you pay for the curriculum for your homeschooler. Or if you live in an area specifically for military, a lot of these have voucher programs for military families to help get them into better. Oh my, please forgive my English. Wow, talking about education there. Anyway, it helps provide the ability to get into other schools that maybe are private schools or charter schools or whatnot that might have fees or uniform or some requirement that the family might not be able to meet that requirement. Otherwise, it also helps low income families get into higher quality schools in general. Again, it varies radically by state. What a voucher is radically changes by state. You've got to look up your individual state, but it's good to know that these things exist, that you might be able to get a scholarship or a voucher or an educational savings account for your kids to help with your educational expenses and whatnot. So I really suggest you check out that page as well. And just for example, I know that vouchers, it goes through and they've got breakdowns on do they have this program and what is the citation in the law for it? What is the program's name? How are you eligible? And what are the enrollment limitations? What are the voucher amounts? Is there a testing requirement? Are private schools included or not? So sometimes these voucher programs only allow you to get into a better public school, not into a private school. So it varies from state to state. Same thing with the ESAs. There's limitations and regulations on all of these things. I mean, that's just how our government works. But it's good to know that these things exist. And I will have all of these links in the description for this podcast episode. The next one I really want to take you to is the website for the Center for Education Reform. And this one covers laws and legislations in regards to charter schools. And it ranks the charter schools and gives a lot of different information about charter schools and whatnot. So, that I think is a good one to take into account. There is another factor to take into account when you're considering a charter school. There are actually states that do not allow charter schools. So if you are in Kentucky, Montana, Nebraska, North Dakota, South Dakota, Vermont, or West Virginia, charter schools don't exist there. So that's just not going to be an option for anyone stationed in those states. We have been stationed in Kentucky, and we knew that because we had been stationed in Kentucky. I was looking at schools and realized charter schools weren't a thing. It specifically states in the research that I was doing that Kentucky's reason for not allowing charter schools is that it was concerned about the quality of education charter schools would provide. And I know that there is a huge tug of war going back and forth between the large Mennonite and Amish communities in the state of Kentucky and the government at the time. And they're still trying to work things out. There was like a ban on home births for a while because of it. It's complicated. Just know that if you're in any of those states, again, Kentucky, Montana, Nebraska, North Dakota, South Dakota, Vermont, or West Virginia, charter schools will not be an option for you. However, the Center for Education Reform does have a lot of information about national charter schools laws and the ranking scorecard for those charter schools. So it's a good resource if you are looking into charter schools in general. That, I think, is probably one of the biggest overviews of a bunch of resource informations that I've ever dumped, or at least have dumped in a while. And I wish I could spend an entire episode on each and every one of these things. And maybe if there is interest, if you want me to spend a whole episode on homeschooling resources, and this was what brought this all up initially. I know quite a few people who homeschool. I know quite a few military who homeschool, and I thought it would be really interesting. And I'm still probably going to pursue this to get a homeschool panel together. get a whole bunch of homeschooling military spouses, moms to come on and explain why they homeschool, what homeschool looks like for them, and what's their favorite curriculums, because I know that's a thing. And in all sincerity, we haven't homeschooled, but I thought I was going to homeschool. I genuinely did. And then I met my children and they wanted to socialize. So did what my kids wanted, which is go to a normal school. Well, a school with other kids. Anyway, but I mean, socialization is still totally possible with homeschooling. There's homeschooling co ops and groups that are fantastic, but it just wasn't what my kids wanted. And we've been very blessed to find great schools where we have been located. So I haven't felt the need to pursue that. However, I have family members on both sides, my husband's side and my side, that homeschool. They genuinely love it. They found that it's best for their kids' needs. And one of them is a military family. And I love hearing the recommendations on different curriculums and those different things. Some of these companies have wonderful curriculums that you may even want to look into using during summer to help keep your kids learning and excited about education. I've used some of those resources to this summer teach my kids how to write cursive because they hadn't learned it at public school, but we're switching to a charter school and they will be needing to know cursive at the charter school they are going to be attending. And I wanted to get them ahead of the curve for that since they're coming in halfway and not from starting from kindergarten because we're military and we bounce around and that's what happens. So basically, the takeaway I have is that we are responsible, but we have rights. Parents have the right to be involved in their kids' education, to know what their kids are being taught, to be able to go into the classroom and help and see and meet the teachers and understand the textbooks or curriculum or whatnot. Parents should be allowed those opportunities. They should be allowed to say, hey, I'm not comfortable with XYZ. So last year, for a fun party, the teacher decided to play a movie that didn't keep with our personal family standards for media. And my daughter explained that to her teacher. I'm not allowed to watch that movie. So her teacher, who I love, this woman is fantastic. I absolutely adore her, called me up in the middle of school and asked, "Hey, your daughter is saying this. I want to understand why. I want to respect and appreciate where you're coming from." And I explained, I'm like, that particular movie would probably be okay. But yes, she is right. That is a standard we have. And the standard we have in our family is we don't watch zombie horror vampire movies. We just don't. Largely because I don't like them. I genuinely, completely 100% love it or hate it, do not like horror movies. You can have your own opinion, but that's my opinion. I don't like horror stuff. And so we don't do that in our house. It's because it's my house. It's my family. It's my kids. I'm allowed to make that decision. And it's not passing a judgment on that teacher or anything like that. But I am so grateful for that relationship I had with that teacher, that she supported my daughter. And instead of my daughter missing out, she got to go to another class and do a fun activity with the other class and be that teacher's special helper. And my daughter came home. She had a fantastic time. She's like, I really didn't want to watch that movie. I didn't feel comfortable. And I'm really grateful. Again, it was rated G. It was totally rated appropriate for children, but it did not meet our family's personal media standards. So I was grateful and super proud of my daughter for standing up for herself and expressing her discomfort. I was super appreciative to that teacher for being responsive and respectful and immediately handling that situation and getting hold of me as a parent and finding out what my desires and wishes are. And that's what I'm talking about, is being an involved parent. We can't be passive parents anymore. We need to be involved in our children's education. And it takes time, it takes effort. But when you build those relationships and then those things come up, like the video incident or whatnot, or maybe it's your kid struggling in school, or there's a discipline issue, or maybe they're having a bad day, and whatever it is, when you've built those relationships with the educational institutions that your kids are attending, when situations arise, you have that foundation to work through them in the most effective and edifying process for the child. And that is the most important thing. If you feel like the best thing for your kid is to homeschool, do it. If you feel like private school is the best option, go for it. If a charter school is what meets your family's needs, spiffy. And if you have a fantastic public school system in your area, oh my word, throw a party, because that is exceptional. And I am grateful to those institutions that do exist. It's getting harder and harder for public school systems to meet the needs of a wide variety of students because of the red tape that is being put upon them. And in a lot of ways, their hands are being tied. And this is coming from the child of a public school teacher. I saw my mom go through all of that crazy. And part of the reason why she switched from public school to charter school to eventually owning her own preschool was because of all of the red tape. She, by the end of her time in public school, was spending more time writing lesson plans to prove that her lessons were educational and edifying than she was actually teaching them. And that was not extra time she was getting paid for. It was cutting it on family time, and she just wasn't comfortable with that. She had been teaching for years. She knew what she was teaching. She had even been on the boards to write the state standards. And it was just getting to be too much red tape. And that's sadly what a lot of our public school teachers are facing, is a lot of red tape. And I am so grateful for all of the people in the public school system who are there because they genuinely love these children and genuinely want to provide them with the best education possible and are supportive of their families and respectful of their families' beliefs. That's just something that's meant a lot to me. So I say this as someone who's worked for a public school district, who has run a nonprofit preschool outreach program. I've worked with military families now for 10 years, and I know that this is something that faces military families on a regular basis because we are constantly moving from place to place, but it's something that every parent is concerned about. The other thing I want to throw in there is a link for a nonprofit organization that keeps track of stuff that is on the school districts, the things that school districts have passed that parents might be concerned about or want to be aware of, but because they're moving from state to state, it's really hard to read through all of this stuff for the public school boards. And so this way it kind of breaks it down into a couple key stuff. Anyway, lots of resources going to be linked in the description for this episode. I hope you found it helpful and enlightening. When it comes to the end of the day, do what is best for your family. And whatever that is, it'll be okay. And also stand up for your beliefs and your rights. Communicate and build those relationships. We're military, we move around a lot. It's kind of easy to just get complacent and not get involved in your kid's school or in the local district or wherever. But it's important because those communities suffer when the military families check out. If we're going to be using those resources, we need to be engaged. We need to be helping. And I know that's a lot. And again, that's my take. If you want to agree to disagree, you are welcome to do so. As always, you have been listening to Life of a Military Wife, and I am your host, Sam Wolf.